Hello and welcome to Crumbs Doilies HQ, and it is Halloween next week, guys, which is obviously, as you know, my favourite day of the year. So I thought I'd give you a really fun celebration cake to make for next week. This is going to be a fault line cake like I've done recently, but not any fault line cake. No, this is going to be a Halloween fault line cake, and instead of jewels and sprinkles and all the other pretty things that go in a regular fault line, this is going to be full of dead people. So I'm going to be making some bones, like skulls, spines, little hands, and they're going to go in the middle of the fault line as if we've dug up a grave. So let's get on with it. It's really straightforward. I'm going to start with my ball of sugar paste. Now this is sugar paste with a little bit of gum tragacanth in it, which makes it into modelling paste, and that means it will set a lot firmer. And I've put a bit of Ivory food colouring in it just to take the white edge off it and make it a little bit more bony. And you want to make sure it's really pliable at this point. So I'm going to make some bones, a little bit like a tibia or a fibia, just a big chunky bone, little skulls, which are actually really cute, some spines and some spooky hands, which are all going to go into our grave. And as well as my modelling paste, I've got a non-slip and non-stick board and a really small selection of tools. So I have a scalpel just for cutting. I have a selection of tools, including this ball tool, which is really handy. And I have some offset long tweezers. And I'm going to start by making my bones because they are by far the simplest of all of them. So start with a ball, just take it off your main blob. And you want to start rolling that into a sausage with your hands. And then when it gets big enough, transfer it to your board and start rolling it out and stretching it so that it's a nice long snake. Now you might notice that I'm wearing gloves, and that's because I don't want any sweat or oils from my hand to transfer into my sugar paste, because it just makes it a little bit harder to work with and a little bit sticky. Anyway, my sausage is just right now, so using a sharp knife or a scalpel if you have one. For the bones, you want to cut just under 1 inch long and just smooth it out a little bit where your knife or scalpel has just made a really hard edge, and then pop it on your board and just with one finger roll into the middle of it, which will thin out the middle and smush out the edges. And then I'm using this odd tool. If you don't have one of these, you could actually do this with a credit card and it would probably just come out as well. So using the flat edge of it, hold onto the middle section and push into the end, and that's going to form your kind of bone dip. So just do that on both sides, and where you've made any kind of really sharp cuts, just smooth those out a little bit with your finger, and then you have a perfect cute little bone. Now you want to make lots of these, mainly because they're really easy, but also because they're really good fillers for your scene that's going on in your fault line. So just put those to one side and they will dry nicely in about an hour or so. And then with the same sausage, you can make your spines, and this is really fun. And this is where I use my offset tweezers. So cut yourself a slightly longer piece, maybe 2.5 to 3 inches. And then using your tweezers, you want to pinch either side of your sausage to make it into a kind of ridged spine shape. So as you can see, that is a really simple way of making a really sort of intricate shape. And you want to make this dry as well, but I like to make sure it dries in a kind of bent position rather than just super straight, just so it's got a bit more action. Right, now it is time for the spooky skeletal hands. Now the hands can be a little bit sort of difficult to imagine because there's so many segments to them, but with the help of my trusty tweezers, I can actually get quite a lot of detail on there. So starting with just a short blob, maybe like 1 centimetre wide. So securing it with your forefinger and thumb, with one hand just smush down, so you're kind of making what looks a little bit like a flipper. And then when you have a flipper that is about 1 inch long, grab your scalpel back or your sharp knife, and you want to cut 5 fingers into it. And I also like to take a little bit off the thumb, just so that it's not out of proportion to the rest of them. So just cut a little bit off. And then with your tweezers, make those little segments by squeezing up at each finger. So it's as simple as that. It's amazing what you can do with a pair of tweezers, isn't it? So make sure you have a few hands in your arsenal. I've made about 8, just because I think it looks really cool having loads of different styles of bones in your grave. But there's one thing missing, and that is the important bit. The noggin, the skull. So I actually really love making these. It's one of my favourite things to make. So I'm going to start with a ball which is about 1.5 centimetres in diameter. Just roll it out until it's smooth. And then you want to make a rough skull shape. And I don't mind if these are a little bit different. I actually think the more different the skulls are, the more cute this is. So on your board, just pinch at one end, and that's going to be the chin. And then this is where I use these two tools. I've got the ball tool and then this other tool, which I like to call a pokey, but you can use a toothpick if you don't have one of these. And with the ball tool, I'm going to use the small end to make the eye sockets. And you might find that when you're making your eye sockets that the skull kind of misshapes a little bit, but again, I don't mind because it gives it a bit more character. It's a little bit wonky. So once you've got your eye sockets, you can grab your pokey or your toothpick and make the nose sockets. There a thing? They are now. And I'm going to use the same tool to make some teeth. So just leave all your bits and pieces to dry. They'll take about an hour to become handleable, but even better if you have the time, do them overnight and they'll be nice and solid. And then we're going to put them in their graves. Let's finish this cake off. So I have some white vanilla buttercream in this bowl. I've also got a little bit of chocolate buttercream, it's obviously brown. Both of these recipes I'm going to put in the description box below so that you can make your very own. And I've obviously got a cake here and it has been crumb coated and chilled. It's very firm and easy to work with right now. So as usual with the fault line cake, what you want to start with is the fault, so the bit that goes in the middle. So with my chocolate buttercream, I'm going to put a panel of thick chocolate buttercream all in the middle. And you don't need to make it neat and tidy or anything because it's quite nice when it's a little bit kind of jagged, but you do want to make sure it's going through the middle and doesn't veer off towards the top or the bottom. And when you've got a nice even coating through the middle, then we need to make it look a bit more like soil because obviously we don't just bury bones in cake, we bury them in soil, guys. So the perfect soil, I don't know if you know this, but it is Oreo crumbs, which is literally bashed up Oreos. You can either do this by hand in a bag with a rolling pin, or if you have a food processor, that's super easy. That'll just whiz them all up to a fine crumb like this, which looks a lot like soil. And then if you want, you can put a tray underneath to catch any sort of pinging off bits of Oreo so you can save them as well. And then you want to grab yourself a little handful and just kind of press it gently into the brown chocolate icing. And when you feel like you're running out, you probably haven't, you've probably got loads of it sitting on your cake board and in your tray. So just gently scoop it in so that you can reuse that stuff. So when your middle band is covered in Oreos, obviously we've got quite a lot of crumbs going on here. Some of them you can get off just by scooping them off just as before, but some of them are kind of sitting on the white buttercream and we don't want that because we don't want to then put it into our final coat and make it all bitty. So I'm just using a soft brush while it's nice and cold to just brush those away. So when you've got as many of the crumbs off as possible, top tip is to just with your hands, just make sure that the top and the bottom of your fault line, the crumbs are pushed in really nice and firmly, because that will help to prevent a crumb transfer when you put the top layer on. And also, I'm going to put it into the fridge for at least half an hour just to set everything. So this has had half an hour, so it's nice and set. So now it's time to put on the bottom and the top sections of the fault line cake so that we actually create a fault line. So they're going to sit a little bit proud of this layer as well. So grabbing a palette knife and some nice smooth vanilla buttercream. I'm using white, but feel free to use whatever colour you like. I'm going to do it on this side for a change. So I'm going to start by smushing a nice thick layer to fill that gap. And then once you've got a nice chunky layer, go for the top section as well. And then when you've got your bottom layer and your top layer sitting proud of the middle section, you can then ditch your palette knife, grab your trusty cake scraper and just lightly smooth out those edges. So with all my icing on, it's now time to finish this by filling the grave with all our bones. So grab your bones and just place them where you feel like it. Because you've got some Oreo crumbs on there, that's going to prevent it from sticking. So I would recommend you give it a little wiggle so that it reaches the buttercream and that will help it stick. And because you want it to kind of feel like you've cracked into it and it's you're revealing something, you don't necessarily want to have all complete bones and skulls. You want to have some of them peeping over. So grab your scalpel and chop a bit off one of your bones and then place it just underneath the ledge so that it looks like it's poking out. So that is my grave filled with bones, looking pretty spooky, but it's looking a bit plain right now. So to jazz this up, I'm firstly going to create a bloody drip along the bottom ledge using really thin royal icing, and I'll put a link to the recipe for royal icing in the description box below. That looks really cool already, but just to finish it off, I'm going to put some little blobs of blood red buttercream on the top just for a little flourish. And that's it, a super spooky, graveyard, bloody Halloween cake, perfectly suitable for Halloween, I think. So please give this a go for next week's celebrations. Definitely take a picture of it because I have to see what you've done with this cake. Put it on Instagram using the hashtag Cupcake Jemma because then I can see it. And I hope that you enjoy it. And I hope that all your friends enjoy it as well. I've certainly enjoyed it. Oh, bloody love Halloween. Did I just swear?